Welcome to the Juice Consumer Direct Podcast. I'm Nate Clegg here with Jacob Thorpe, Carson Poppenger, and Justin Jump, who's joined us. And guys, let's talk about company culture specific to sales organizations, because that's what we are, and I think that's a pain point for a lot of our clients, how to create and maintain a really high-performing sales culture. So, Justin, you're here with us. You do a lot of the recruiting and hiring. How do you do it? How do you find the right people or the right fit for a sales culture?
I think what you mentioned first is important. You got to bring in the right people, obviously, and that starts with recruiting. And we're very cautious on who we're bringing in. I think for me, and I tell my team this all the time, the two biggest things that we should be looking for is coachability and reliability. I can get you to where you need to be with your skills, but if you don't have the other two things, it's going to be way too difficult, I guess, to get you to where you even want to be. So coachability, reliability, and then having a drive and determination to want to be successful. You got to have that. Like, we can't bring that for you either. So that's kind of the starting point for us. But I think there's a whole lot of other things we can list off there as well. But that's kind of the starting point. I
think we're pretty fortunate, and we're fortunate by our own design. We have a lot of people who apply to work with us. And we have a lot of people coming back who are referrals or people who used to work with us and they have come back to work with us again. And so we have the option to be kind of picky. But I think that's because as an organization, we've done a good enough job for over a long enough amount of time that we have a lot of people applying to work with us so that we can you guys on your side can filter through and find those sort of things. So I think a sales culture kind of builds on itself over time and allows you to be able to be picky like that. So yeah.
I think if you don't have a place where those people come in and they see people like them around them or with the same goals that they do or that they have, those people, there will be natural attrition too. So it's not only bringing in the right people, but it's retaining the right people so that when you do hire the right people, they see other right people and that push them to be better and push them to grow. And that probably happens top down, I would say. What are the values that you espouse to have, and how are those values evident in the decisions that you make with your team members and the people that are making it happen?
Yeah, we're a performance company, and so performance has got to be top level, right? That, and of course integrity, to make sure that performance is right and correct. But people need to come in and see that. They need to see that that's the culture and that they're the right fit already, just because of who they're surrounded by. Yeah, that makes sense.
Well, when I came in, I was surprised by this, but we were on average 6 to 7% attrition. And at a sales experience contact center, like, that's unheard of. Like, I had never been associated with a business that was driving 6 to 7% attrition. Like, you just don't hear about it. So I was trying to figure out, like, what's the deal? Like, how is that happening?
Who's fudging the numbers, right?
Yeah, yeah. Like, seriously, like, you hear that and you're like, whoa, that's crazy. But ultimately, it comes down to making sure that we stick to our brand and what we're trying to bring on is a standard, right?
What was it like for you? I mean, you're, out of people at this table, the newest, the most recent hire. What was it like for you coming into Squeeze, and what was the experience that you had when you started seeing what the culture was?
I think I've told you guys this. The very first thing that came to my mind was how clean the place was.
Like the interior office?
Yeah, that and just the branding on the walls. It was just it felt like an actual business. It didn't feel like a contact center, right? And so I loved that about it initially. That was like the first thing that stood out to me. And then I think just how welcoming the vibe felt. It didn't feel like it was, a stressful environment, if you will. It felt like everyone was on top of what they were supposed to be doing. And that brought me a lot of confidence. I came from a place where kind of felt like we were always building an airplane in flight. Everything's going all over the place all the time, and you're constantly trying to fill a plug. And I didn't feel that here.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And to speak to it, and I think we mentioned this in a previous podcast, but our new hires, 87% of them hit bonus week 1, which means we've got the right people in there, they're the right fit, they're going through your training and doing a good job. And if we didn't hire the right people, they probably wouldn't be at 87%, no matter how good your training was, right? Because we don't want to try to sound elitist, but there's some people who are really great at sales. And there's some people who can be coached into being great at sales, and then there's some people that aren't the right fit, and that's fine. There's other opportunities for them out there in the world, but we've got the right ones, and they're going through the right process, and they're hitting those metrics they need to hit to be successful, and I think that keeps them around. One of the things that I think can be the toughest is balancing an incentive plan that matches both the demand for performance and the need for quality at the same time, and to kind of create that environment where, hey, everybody's going to do what they're going to do, and they need to do it right, but they're not feeling overly pressured to get their numbers. So Carson, you've been doing this a long time. What do you think are some of the key components of creating a strong incentive plan for a sales team?
I think making it equitable for people, I think, is like super important. And it goes back to, like, I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but like when I was going to school, I kind of, I was working while I was going to school. I was working for a company, and the only high income earner in the whole operation was like the top leader, and everybody else was sort of like trying to get there. But there's only one position for that, in that role. And I kind of realized, that the problem with that, because everyone was working hard to make them look good, but they weren't really benefiting from it. And so I really wanted to devise a compensation plan where the better you do, the more you can earn. And we're thankful, like in a sales marketing environment, it's kind of easy to attach, compensation to certain behavior and outcomes. And that's kind of what we've done with what we've figured out for our compensation plans. But I also realized too, where I've been in companies before, where I've seen unattainable bonus structures, where if I perform 50% better than the top tier, then I can earn a bonus. If I hit this unattainable goal and do all these things, then I can earn a little bit more income. And that's kind of defeating. I think for a lot of people will quit before they get there. And there's no reason why if the person is effective at this point and this point, and there's ROI for the company and there's profit for the company, why wouldn't we want to incentivize them to hit those points and keep leveling themselves up and keep earning more? And we look at that from our agents, for our team leaders, for our managers, for our account managers, all the way up, because I think that people want to be rewarded for their success, and they also don't want to really be rewarded for for things that they can't control. Like, they want to be rewarded for the things that they do control, and a lot of that goes into them. Goals are aligned top to bottom, which we've talked about.
Yeah, I may mention this before, but the story of Boys in the Boat, right? You've got it's a story around World War II. There was a group of boys, I think it was the University of Washington, I believe, and they were like the JV rowing squad. And there was the varsity rowing squad, and they were kids that had rowed their whole life. They were a little bit more privileged than this JV squad. If you were on the JV squad, you had housing and food, and a lot of these kids didn't have that, right? So these kids, basically, it's this kind of rags to riches story. All of these people with different backgrounds but similar values and similar goals learn to row in the same direction, and ultimately they surpass the varsity squad. They win nationals. They represent the U.S. in World War II against Germany, in Germany, and they win the gold medal. And it's, what is the power of all of these people, top to bottom? Even though they have diverse backgrounds and they're different, they're working towards the same goal. They have this saying, as one, when everyone's rowing in the same direction. That culture is super, super powerful. The opposite is also true. If everyone's in sync and one person isn't, that problem or that friction or whatever you want to call it is more pronounced too, because it's pretty clear that someone isn't rowing in the same direction as everybody else.
You saw that in the story too, with one particular character who went through they had some personal outside stuff going on, I think with their relationship or something like that, right? And then that carried into the boat, and they were like they weren't pulling their weight, and the team was struggling, and they had to get that person to get their head right, and then all of a sudden they did better. Yeah,
which is why getting the right people in the boat is so important. Like we were talking about, you can have people who are very different, but who are all aligned on the same values and goals, it makes you a lot more powerful and a lot more efficient when everyone is rowing in the same direction.
Yeah.
One of the things I like about the compensation plans that you guys have put together for the squeeze agent and for their managers all the way to the very top is it really is aligned. Everybody's aligned, and that's part of that, right? Like they all have that same purpose, that common goal of production, right? And on the other flip side of it, we've done something really smart too, where we do quality checks nonstop on our agents to help them improve and perform better. But if they're faking performance or creating false performance, we have a quality kicker that all of a sudden wipes out some of the incentive plan. So they know, hey, I have to perform, but I have to do it the right way. Because if I don't do it the right way, there goes my commission. And that's the way it's got to be in this sort of market, in this sort of in the business that we have today. So it ensures quality on the client side as well. So that aligns us all the way through your team in managing the clients and making sure that the product that we're delivering is high quality, high value.
And having those accountability systems so that when that does happen, you have a way to deliver that to the agent and to make sure that behavior is corrected, that in a way that's effective, and it doesn't, that agent doesn't feel like, oh man, like I can't recover from this. But the way that you position that is really important to your culture too. That's also important on your management executive level. Is there pride in your decision making? And if you make a bad decision or if you make a mistake, can you handle that feedback? Or are you constantly trying to manage your own reputation? Because once trust is gone, you've already really lost the battle. If you can't trust that what someone is saying is true, or you have to spot check what they're saying, or you have to dive deeper because they're protecting their reputation, then you can't make a decision, or you can't make a good decision.
Humility and all that goes back to what Justin talked about too, with hiring getting the right folks in, and as part of the team, because if there's too much pride there, or like lack of teachability, lack of humility,
maybe. Yeah.
I think
They already know everything.
They already know everything. Yeah. Sometimes if someone has a tremendous amount of experience doing what we do, maybe in another environment, we may overlook that person from a hiring standpoint, because we bring them in and they're like, these are the things that have worked well for me, that I know work for me, and they're not really open to our way of doing things or the systems that we've built and the methods that we use. And, that can create friction. I mean, you want new ideas sometimes, right? But sometimes in certain functions like this, you want to really just have people that are willing to get in the boat and learn what's going to, help them win in that particular race or whatever. And yes, humility, teachability is a huge piece of that. And it goes up to the manager level too. I mean, we all have a little bit of pride in our own ideas or whatever, and being able to step back and say, have that self-awareness to like, hey, maybe I should look at this other idea and try that.
Yeah, I think the initial reaction when someone questions you or doesn't like your idea is to get defensive and try to defend it. And oftentimes the best thing you can do is, I talked to one of our managers about this, because when this manager was being questioned or saying, hey, that doesn't seem right, they'd put up walls. And I said, hey, man, instead of putting up walls, why don't you invite other people in and talk it through? Like, realize that we're all on the same team. We're all trying to solve the same problems. And the information that I have might not be the information that you have, so let's talk about it and make the best decision possible. Because in a true team, a culture of equality and meritocracy, everyone's opinion should be heard, and everyone should feel like their opinion, like there are no bad ideas. So let's take the ego off the table and invite everyone in for the conversation.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things that you said a little bit earlier, Jacob, was is accountability. And we talked about that as a group a little bit ahead of this podcast, is how important accountability is. So, we'll go back to the boys in the boat analogy. Well, one person was off. Well, he was off because everybody else was, and you could notice that he was off because everybody else was in sync, right? And accountability is important so that you can understand when something is standing out, then you have to say something about it. Because if something can if somebody's doing something that's wrong, that's off, the culture's off for whatever reason, and that can continue, then people lack a certain amount of trust in leadership. They stop listening to guidance. The process breaks down. So holding people accountable at all levels is super important to maintaining a meaningful culture
Well,
sure.
and especially if somebody doesn't know that they're doing something wrong, right? Like, and sometimes that is the case. If they're not getting that feedback, they can't make the change. And I think that's susceptible in a lot of environments as well. And I think we do a good job of that here of like Jacob said, have multiple people looking in, whether that's QA, your team lead, your operations manager, whoever it may be. Like, it's not just one person who might miss something that's going on. If it's a poor behavior that has to get corrected, we're doing our best to try to correct that on the spot versus waiting for it to get out of hand and causing a lot more issues.
One thing that you said in your interviews that you look for is someone who's coachable or humble. How do you look for that in the interview process? How is that something that you ensure is there when you're hiring?
Coachability is to me is a natural thing. If I ask somebody a question, hey, tell me a time you got feedback and how did you respond to that? Tell me the story, whatever it may be. If somebody actually gives you a good story, you know that person has paid attention to their self-development.
There's some self-awareness there.
And if they're like taking a long time to be like, oh man, that's a tough question, I'm trying to think that through. Like, to me, that's like, well, are you self-aware? Like, do you know that there's been times in your life where there was something that needed to be corrected but didn't get corrected, right? So I think you just know through asking the right questions and having them kind of answer previous experiences.
I was reading a post online about, what is one of the most toxic patterns that you can see in in the workplace. And they said it was someone who privatizes success and distributes blame. It's someone who, when things go well, they want to take the credit. And when things go wrong, they want to distribute that blame to other people. So when it goes well, it's on me. When it doesn't go well, it's on somebody else. And that behavior is so dangerous
Toxic.
And so indicative of entitlement and insecurity. And it's really, really dangerous to have those types of personalities at the agent level, at the management level, at the executive level. Good leaders give credit when things go well, and they take responsibility when things don't.
Well, you've both said a couple things that reminds me of something else that we've discussed in terms of building this kind of sales culture. And you said something, Justin, I think is important. Sometimes people don't even know they're doing something wrong, right? And then you said something like, those people probably do know they're doing something wrong, but how do you know, though, when somebody's off? And I think a culture of transparency really feeds that. For us at Squeeze, we have leaderboards everywhere so people can see how they're performing, and they can see how they're performing against their peers. We talk openly all the time. We have our morning GM call where we review the campaigns from the previous day, and we know exactly what happens. And I was somewhat unprepared for the level of transparency that we share across all leadership. Across all leadership, we know exactly how well a campaign is doing, what's its financial health, what's its performance health. And because of that, we can look at it and say, okay, this transparency has created an environment where we can hold each other accountable because we know exactly what's going on, right? We know when somebody's coming up with stuff and distributing blame because we're so involved with one another and we're so openly communicating with one another about what's going on. We know when something's off, right? And it's the same thing with an agent. You can identify when something's wrong and you can show them when they need to change something because you're like, well, look at what your peers are doing. Look at what we've trained you on. So that transparency is super important, I think, for maintaining this.
That feedback can be such an inflection point, though, for that person. So let me give you an example. This is pretty vulnerable of me, but maybe 5 years ago, I was managing some of the operations, and Carson pulled me in. And he's like, "Hey, I've noticed something." He's like, "You're focusing on the things that are easy, and you're not focusing on the things that are hard." So when things go well, you're saying, "Yeah, like I did this," but when things don't go well, we're not diving into it enough. And I remember at first I was like, "Dang, like that hurts. Like I'm falling short," right? Do you remember that?
Yeah. It's pretty vulnerable if you bring this up even, but.
But
talk it out.
Well, no,
Yeah,
it's good though. Like it was such an inflection point for me where at first my response was like, "Oh, that doesn't seem," and this was a long time ago. This is, like I said, this was 5 or 6 years ago, but I sat there and I said, "Hey, you know what? That's kind of true. Not intentional, but it is kind of true. And I really made it a goal to start digging in and to start giving credit to my people and to start focusing on developing other people. And that was a moment that, like, I can remember the things that I've done wrong a lot better than the things that I've done right. And I think in general, you learn a lot from the mistakes that you make. I always tell my account managers, you'll learn so much more from the thing that you did wrong than the hundreds of things that you do right in a given day. So when things don't go your way, or when you do make mistakes, because no one's perfect, be humble enough to say, hey, there's something for me to learn here and grow from it. And now I really try to be better at that, and it's something that I think my people would feel like I focus on. But if we didn't have that accountability and that conversation, like, I might have been flying blind, or I might have developed some habits and some tendencies that weren't good.
Well, one thing that we strive for, and I'm always, people have kind of taken it in a negative light, but it's like, I'm going to be aware of certain performance, and I think it's good to raise concerns about things because then you can improve on it and fix it and things. And we try to have leaders that do that rather than just like leaders that are like, hey, good job, high five. We've talked about that before, like the candy dish. Like, hey, have a piece of candy, high five. Everybody did a great job. Like, no one ever does anything wrong. No one ever, and it's like, how effective of a leader are you if you're not even noticing like where people can improve? And I think something that I've talked about too is it's not just low performers that need feedback, it's high performers too, because high performers really need to be challenged because they're going to come to a point probably where they're like, there's nothing else I can do here. And it's not feedback in a negative way to like beat them down or make them feel like less than they are or anything like that. It's feedback to everyone can always improve. I can always improve, and I'm trying to lead by example because I know that you've called me out on things before. Like, hey, like this, I don't agree with this, and I'm like, okay, yeah, you're right, and that comes back to having humility and things, and so I'm always trying to do better. But
I think you brought up a great point. Even your top performers, right? Like there's been times where I've managed sales performers, and they might have an incredible day. Maybe they're outshining any day they've ever had before. That should be kind of an alarm to me. Not just as and you might be thinking, well, why? Like, guys performing really well. But it's because generally whenever that starts to happen, you need to heighten your awareness and make sure that person's actually doing the right things, right? Like, how are they getting to that spot all of a sudden?
If you're performing 2 times as well as everyone else, what are you doing that no one else is doing?
Yeah. And sometimes those top performers, and this is what it comes down to, they don't recognize that they might be doing something that they shouldn't be doing, and it might not be getting caught because the leader thinks like, oh, they're performing. I don't need to worry about them, right? I got to go focus on these mid guys or these lower guys. But no, like, you still got to go put attention and focus on those top performers to ensure. And heck, maybe you can even help those guys teach the rest of the team on what they're doing to go drive those results, right?
Yeah, you got to go QA them immediately.
Yeah, make sure compliance is in check.
Well, sometimes I've noticed that those top performers and the bottom performers, they're outliers, right? And sometimes you can't even coach to them. So if you have QA'd them and they look right, sometimes people are just super gifted and they know how to do sales so well that you can't really like look at them and say, okay, this is the template, because they're just these crazy outliers,
Mm-hmm.
Well,
whatever method they're using is like maybe not repeatable in mass.
It's unique to them.
Yeah, I've seen that a number of times. One thing I've said for a long time too with like low performers and people that are struggling in general is, if I'm sitting here at my desk and I'm doing this function, outbound calls, whatever, and I'm not having success, and I look to my right and I see Nate, and Nate's struggling, and I look to my left and I see Justin struggling, guess what? It's not me. It's the system. It's the leads. It's the software, whatever we're using. None of it is our fault because it's not working. So it's really important in your culture to make sure you've got those examples of success, and you can sort of like divide them within your organization so that it can breed more success. Because if people are looking around and they're not having success and they're not seeing it, they're going to come to the conclusion that there just is no success, right? Yeah. And so
that's true. And you've got to, especially if a campaign is profitable, you got to make sure that you define success in a way that everybody understands it and appreciates it for what it is. I've been in sales organizations where they're like, yeah, everything's always terrible. You guys are never enough and all that. But when you get to leadership, you start looking and be like, oh, well, we're doing really, really well. And it just creates this really short-term effect of like just this panic performance that usually doesn't work out very well. So.
In times when we've struggled in the past, when we were much smaller and I was kind of more involved in the day-to-day operation of the floor, and we were having a bad day or things weren't going well, I always felt it, even though we needed to like keep everybody focused on production on the phone, I would take everybody off the phone and I would have like a quick huddle with the team, and I'd have some gift cards or something like that in my pocket. And I love to pick out the people in the group that were doing exceptionally well and unexpectedly just reward them in front of everybody. Like, hey, I just want to call out so-and-so here's hitting this performance target. Here's a $25 gift card. They weren't expecting it. And the rest of the team's like, oh, now I'm aware this person's performing well. What can I do to get that kind of recognition? And it suddenly starts to like turn the table a little bit, and you go from like a bad day to a good day, and you start to build performers and winners instead of, that contrary where everyone's struggling.
Yeah. One of the things that I always tried to do when I was managing the operations was to understand what it was that motivated the reps and the team leads that were reporting to me. So, for example, was it just helping out the consumer, like getting them in a better financial situation? Some people, like that was their I just want to help as many people as I can. For other people, it was growth or a title. For other people, it was money. For others, it was recognition. And for others, they were best motivated by, like, I don't want to get written up, Some people are motivated by fear. That's usually not a good thing. But helping people stay engaged, you can't have the same message for everybody. You need to know your audience, and you should know your team well enough, or at least train your team to be able to identify those things in their teams so that they can engage those reps and those salespeople in the way that's most effective for that person. It's not a one-size-fits-all thing. I remember those meetings. We didn't have like all the messaging apps and ways to recognize people, the gamification systems that we do now. So it was like in front of everybody, the owner saying, hey, great job, here's a gift card. Like that was pretty cool.
That's all it takes sometimes.
Yeah, and everyone's like, wow, that's sweet.
Yeah, for sure. Well, guys, here are my final thoughts on our conversation so far today. Consistency, transparency, and accountability. They might sound cliche but when they're present in a business, you can tell and you can feel it, and it creates a culture and can create a culture that is dynamic and consistent and powerful. So those are some of my final thoughts. What do you think, Justin?
I think for me, when you recognize that there might be an issue, is figure out solutions and do something about it as quickly as you can, right? Like don't prolong and wait, because if you let it fester, it's going to get worse and worse. You got to take care of it immediately.
Yeah, I would say protect your culture and be humble enough to learn from the things that you don't do right. Be honest with yourself and be humble enough to deliver feedback and to take feedback, because that is ultimately what will help you grow and help you change. That's where you'll learn the most.
Yeah. Carson?
My final thought, I like to win, and I like to be part of a winning culture, and I like to have our team, be proud of a team that we have that can win and get things done. And I think you guys here at this table are largely part of our big reason for our success. And so build a team and culture that can win, and I think it's a lot better to win than to struggle. And so if you're struggling at all with your sales process, your sales experience, give us a call at Squeeze.
Yeah. Well, this is the Juice Consumer Direct Podcast. I'm Nate Clegg here with Justin Jump, Carson Poppenger, and Jacob Thorpe.
Let us know if you have any questions or comments.
And like and subscribe. Give us some interaction on our socials.